So good evening. My name is Rob Lydon, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the 6th Chatham Marconi Speaker Series presentation of 2024. Cape Cod has long been a focal point for our country's maritime activities from the very beginning of the pre-colonial period, through our wars with England, into the great age of sail, right into the 20th century travel and beyond, to exciting present-day regattas. Many sea captains have distinguished themselves by opening new harbors for trade, in winning heroic sea battles, and demonstrating entrepreneurial genius with their nautical skills and tactics. We'll learn the names of these bold seamen and have an occasion to see and appreciate what these sailors have accomplished for themselves, for their local towns, and for the benefit of a developing young nation. Dr. Pregot has spent over half a century in the field of education. He has served as a modern language teacher, high school principal, a district-wide school superintendent, professor of education, and a university director of an educational leadership department. He's published several articles and a textbook on the dispositions needed to be an efficient school leader. He has lived on the Cape for several years with his wife, Judith, and is still an online professor and author. The maritime history of the Cape has caught his attention for the past few years, and he's currently studying the complexity of slave trading and abolitionism in the Bay State. Following this presentation, Mike will answer your questions. So on your computer, enter your questions at any time if you're at home by clicking on Q&A at the bottom of your screen and typing them in. I'll screen the questions and relay them to our speaker. Similar questions may be combined to avoid repetition. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Pregot.
Thank you. So thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. What got my attention, I play golf in Brewster, the Captain's Golf Course. And the Captain's Golf Course has, as you know, two courses, port and starboard. Every hole is named Captain Perry, Captain Ellis, Captain whoever, okay? And one day I went to the pro, and I said, who are these gentlemen? What can I learn about them? He said, there's nothing here. So that was my first concept. It took me about a year and a half, but I found something about each one of them, a small little thing, and wrote a small book about that. But the more I read, the more I became enthused. It's an amazing thing. When you go through the streets of Cape Cod, you see Beers and Perry Ellis and these different names. It's like many of these men accomplished some great things. So we're going to learn a little bit about them today. So when you talk about captains in general, the major categories, deep sea captains, those are the people who go way, way out, China, around the world, they go everywhere, Egypt. Whaling is a specialty all to itself. Most of the captains from whaling in Cape Cod went up to the Arctic Ocean. There are whalers in Hawaii, a whole different breed, whole different type of whaling too. Coasters are people that went to the Cape of, even Labrador, of Canada, and went down to Georgia and Florida. They would do commercial products along the way. Those was another type of boat. Packet boats were here on the bay, over on the Brewster side where I am, and they would go to Boston, local, Providence, not very far, but they would deliver products and pick people up. Then the war broke out, we'll talk about that. And then some people actually began entire shipping lines. For example, Captain J. Henry Sears, the fellow who built that Provincetown Memorial, and let's say he built it individually, but he was responsible for it. He planned it, he paid half of it, he organized it. It was just an amazing thing. So we're going to learn a little bit about different people today. Three parts, basic parts. First, I'm going to just talk general maritime history here in Cape Cod. Then I'm going to pick about Barnstable meaning the whole Barnstable area. And then Cape Cod town by town, what they're kind of famous for in the maritime industry. So in my mind, I kind of broke down four different time periods for the Cape Cod sea captains. In 1620, when you first came here, the Pilgrims first arrived, there was no country. This was, a wild and open land. People could just come and do pretty much what they want, out within reason. And then the war broke out. Well, by the way, after I showed you this part, I'm going to show you examples of each one of these areas. We didn't have a navy. We fought England, but we were an emerging country. We didn't have an army, didn't have a navy. Everything was volunteer. So we had to develop one quickly. We'll talk about that. Then 1816 to around right before the Civil War, 1860, that's kind of the big time of sail. That's when it exploded. That's when many, many people in Cape Cod said, I want to make a living, I need to feed my family, I need to do well. And they developed these ideas and developed them, and it worked out pretty well for many, not all, but for many. And then the last half of the century, 1800s, shipping grew. Big shipping grew and had a lot of different things. So we'll talk about each one of those to some degree. But before I begin even with that, I think there's a misimpression. I didn't realize how much the indigenous people fished and spent the time on water. We don't think of that. We don't think of indigenous people being, the land and hunters and whatever. But there were a good number of them were very, very good seamen. In fact, they had the Wampanoags had two places, out of Wellfleet and out of Martha's Vineyard. Once a year, they had a thing called the Padawe, which is a hunting of the whale. And the men would go on the boats, and they'd take about 7 different long canoes, dugout canoes, encircle a whale, capture it, drag it all the way back to shore, and then make a kind of ceremony out of it. So they cut the fish up, and it was really a big to-do. So I didn't realize that, but that predates way before we came. So you probably know, but some of the tribes that were here, they're all related. They're all somewhat related. They're all Iroquois. They're all part of the Wampanoag group. But you have the Michons up in Provincetown, you have the Manamoinics in this neck of the woods, Norsets over in Orleans, Matakisi and Brewster and so on. So each one of these has an individual area. And depending, the sachem, by the way, they're a matrilineal group, so they're run by women. So for the most part, if a man wanted to get married, he would have to go to mom and say, Mom, I want to marry so-and-so from that tribe next door. And she would say, hold on. She would check out, and she said, okay, or no good. She would make the final decision. And that was the way they ran their tribes too. The women really ran the tribes. The sachems, more than half of the sachems, the head people were women. All right, now getting back to boats now. Okay, so go too fast? No. Packet boats were kind of the first beginning. The packet boat could be any kind of boat that basically went from a small area, just not very big trips. It took trips to, like I say, Boston, Providence, Salem, those kind of things. And they're different in size. The example of this boat here, that's a big packet boat. That's like 1825. Most packet boats were maybe half that size, especially before the Colonial War. They were kind of maybe a 2-mast ship, or maybe almost like a very small skiff almost, but they served the purpose. What do? They got mail, they got cargo, they did different things. That picture you see there is a Princeton, which went from Boston to Cape Cod quite a few times in 1826. Now the war began. Now we needed something more than just little tiny boats. We needed to fight. So you heard of John Paul Jones, and I didn't realize this, but he was a mercenary. After he trained our Navy, he went to Russia and trained the Russian Navy, and then he went to Finland and trained the Finnish Navy. I would say he was a great American. He certainly did our job, but he didn't do it for the love of the country. He did it for the money part too. He definitely knew how to make $1 out of the whole thing. So his ship is the first ship you see there in the middle there, the John Paul Jones, the Bonhomme. The picture you see on the right is kind of an old galley ship. You see the big deck on that ship. Those were very popular because the reason they were popular is they needed bigger cargo ships to hold cannons, to hold material supplies, carrying a lot of different heavy equipment. So they were an older boat. They were like a 1700 boat from Europe, but they were brought here. They were rectified and used for our needs. Those of you who live near Orleans, there's a street called Tonsard Road. I don't know if you know where Tonsard Road is in Orleans, but head about halfway down on the right-hand side. See a little tiny half-cape house, very cute little house, little sign that will say Crosby on it. That man was the head gunner for the USS Ironside for about 30 years. So he was Revolutionary War. He was War of 1815 when they went to the Great Lakes. He was on board that ship for many, many years and did a great job. The picture on the bottom is the old Ironside fighting a battle and winning. So now the great ages said we needed bigger boats for the most part. We needed bigger boats. I just picked two here in general. Have you heard of Esther Eldridge? He was relatively big name in his day. He had the record of going to England in one way, 13 days. Prior to that, it took 20 days, 19 days. He did it in 13, so he's claimed to fame. The example you see on the bottom, the Witch of the Wave, the way they would advertise these boats in general, they would do it two ways. One way would be they would go to a library or a public meeting hall, a tavern, and post on the wall. So set like a big poster on the wall and saying, we're going to California, we're going to China. If you need something or want something, let me know, we'll buy it for you, and whatever. So Lewis F. Miller, had his boat, and he said, we can get you to the gold rush era in 119 days. Because there was like a speed record, because they had to go all the way down South America, around the Cape of Good Horn, all the way up the Pacific Ocean, all the way to San Francisco and beyond. So it was a great, great thing. I read the poster, one of the posters, not this one, but said we can go one way if you are a gold rush enthusiast and you want to get a head start, $35 one way to go from Boston to the gold rush. I guess you can't come back, it's only one way. So they didn't say what the food was either, so I'm not sure how they handle the food, but that's a long time to be on a boat. I don't think, they didn't have refrigerators, so I'm not much of it. Sounds like a shaky thing to me, but somehow they made it, somehow. Now the boats got a little bit bigger. When you get to the Civil War, then you see metal boats, steamers, and paddle boats, and frame carriers. When we were in high school, at least when I was in high school, I was told it was the Monitor versus the Merrimack. That's kind of not the right terminology to use, because they were both northern ships. The Merrimack was made in Salem, and the Monitor was made in Boston. But it was captured and taken over by the USS Confederate ships, and so that's really the Monitor versus the Confederate ship. But that's okay. It's still, we get the idea. We know what that's all about. And then the last biggest ship would be the big steamers. There was a fellow who lived in Wellfleet by the name of Edward Knight Collins. He comes from a long line of fishing people. His grandfather and his great-grandfather, before him, were big shipping people. He began kind of a big company. And you can see the steamer ship, there's a picture of a steamer ship there now. And they can go even quicker now. Steamer ship could make it to Europe probably 6 or 7 days. So it's kind of a great big advantage than the older ships. That's when eventually the Queen Mary would come and Titanic, eventually those bigger, even big ships would come and make their way around. So if I have questions, by the way, as I'm going along, don't hesitate. I'd like to answer questions. If it's a small question, ask it now. If it's a bigger question, I'll just tell you we'll come back to it. All right, so let's talk about some captains, some actual captains from Barnstable. All of these people live pretty much right in the Barnstable County part of Barnstable as well. Austin Beers is the correct pronunciation, I think. You go to Hyannis, again, these streets, you see them everywhere, these names. They're very known, well named. Josiah Richardson, Scudder is another street I've seen a lot. Anthony Scudder Finney, Russell Marston, Mad Jack Percival, James Beacon Crocker, and William Sturgis. So I'm going to learn a little bit about each one. This fellow here is one of my favorites. He began as a young man directly as a slave trader. So in 1820, he was going out, and his job was to take the slaves, put them on board, move them up to the north. Most of them came to Boston. But then he realized his job was a really particular one, because he used to put the slaves on the auction block. And you could hear the mothers crying and the families being separated. There were just horrific moans and groans and terrible things going on. So eventually, he became an abolitionist. He just quit doing what he was doing, worked in Boston, but he had the job of the Boston Port Harbor Master, which was great, because then he got to know all the ships were coming, who was sympathetic to slaves and who wasn't. So he kind of finagled a way to get many slaves to safety. So he became a full-fledged abolitionist. He wrote a book which is available in the library. It's an old book, but you've got to be careful with it. It's a really old book. Reminiscences of the Slave Trade. And one of his famous lines is that after 30 years of shipping, I shall no longer trade below the Mason-Dixon line. He just had it. I'm not going to do that anymore. Josiah Richardson was another interesting guy. There was a ship called the Staghorn, which was, in his day, was a fantastic ship, very modern for its day. In 1861, there was a race from Boston to San Francisco, and this fellow, he won the race by 5 days. I forget how many days it was probably in the neighborhood of 130, but something like that. But imagine winning a race by 5 days. That's pretty outstanding when you can do that. He traded mainly with China. China was one of his major ways of going. He got lost at sea. When you read about a captain lost at sea, it's a literal thing that means they were lost at sea. That's not they didn't die at home, they didn't die in their backyard, they died at sea. After Scott of Finney was another able-bodied seaman. He went around the world for commercial trading about 13 times. And you remember I gave you that list about the whales and packets and so on? Usually you specialize in one. There's one guy, there's a couple, 2 or 3 exceptions to that, but most of them did that. Well, he was a deep sea captain all the way. He went everywhere. He was captured by the Russians one time, captured by the Turkish. He had 4 different big ships under his command at different times. But the irony is, this poor man, he lived near Katuitt, and he said, he was almost in retirement, practically in retirement. And the captain said, do me a small favor, there's some oysters right in Connecticut, just pick them up and bring them back. Well, he did, but a storm came up, and he died probably within 4 miles of his house. The ship went under, so didn't get to much retirement, unfortunately. Russell Marston is another one of my heroes, too. He was hired, but he was a ship in the 1820s and 25 years, did a lot of merchandising and sailing. Became friends finally with William Lloyd Garrison, you've heard of him, of course. And he was hired by the Quakers eventually to smuggle runaway slaves into a safe harbor. And then eventually by 1830, he finally realized that shipping is not what he wanted. Again, he just made his mind up not to be involved with that at all. He opened up a restaurant in Boston, Marston's Restaurant, which, if you're a Boston person, that was the restaurant to go to. It was big. He hired all black staff, which was very unusual for its day. People didn't want to have black staff, but he did. Women could be allowed to go in. In those days, women who were unescorted could not go to a restaurant. Had to come with a gentleman escort, but he was okay with that. And he was well connected. He even named his daughter Helen Garrison in honor of his close friend. Louisiana lived right next door to Garrison, by the way. They were very close allies of each other. If you go on Commonwealth Avenue, I went to BU for my doctorate, and you could see these beautiful statues along the way. There's a big statue. I was surprised. I walked down there. Paul Russell Marston's statue is right there. So he was well respected in Boston. Mad Jack Percival was another interesting fellow. He was a trader during the Civil War, and we needed to get more seamen. You needed to be able-bodied seamen. At that time, Old Ironsides was at sea for quite a few years, and the Navy Department said, hey, let's just wreck it. It's just not advantageous to us to spend the money. It's going to cost us $70,000, which in those days was lots of money, and they didn't want to do it. So he knew a lot of people, a lot of volunteers. He said, I will fix it for under $10,000. And you don't have to pay me a penny. He has friends who contributed money. He raised the money himself, restored the ship. Not only did he restore the ship, he made it very, very seaworthy. He says, I'll show you how good it is. He ran around the world twice. So it's pretty safe. We're pretty sure he can use the ship just about anywhere. They call him Mad Jack because he had a bad temper. So I wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of the Mad Jack. James Bacon Crocker is another guy. He was kind of a religious fellow as well. You see a picture of a rat there. I guess one of the stories told about him, many of these ships had problems with rodents a lot of time. So anyway, he saw his big pack of rodents on his ship, wanted to get rid of them in the ocean. He developed a concoction of honey, wine, 2 other things, and just kind of he kept experimenting what attracted them the most. And eventually he made a trail, and just kind of walked all the rodents off the ship. He kind of figured out a way to get rid of them. So they called him the Pied Piper, which he didn't like that, but that was his nickname. His wife was on board. His wife had a swear jar. I don't know if that's the first swear jar that I saw. There might have been some before that. But she did not put up with any kind of nonsense. If you use blasphemous language, obscene language, you put a couple of pennies or whatever into a swear jar. So that's the way she wanted it. Sturgis is one of those exceptions to the rule. He did about everything. He was packet boat, deep sea, war hero. He did just about everything. The way he made his money originally, the Sturgis High School is named after him, as you know, in Barnstable, Sturgis High School. There's 2 charter schools there. It's a great school, by the way. Being an educator, I kept reading about Sturgis. They have a great international baccalaureate program, an IB program, which is pretty outstanding. I wanted to do one in my school. I couldn't even get my school committee to go along with for me. But he made his money initially in the fur trade. So he could buy a pelt in Alaska for $35, bring it to China, which really loved some of our customs and so on, and sell it for $1,000. So obviously he did a lot of those. He did as many of those as he possibly could. He did well. The other good thing about Sturgis, he was a great linguist. So the way he got these indigenous people out in the Oregon, Washington area to do things for him, he learned their language. And he took a boat and made like a notation, like a dictionary. He was really kind of, and there was no written language at that time. These indigenous people had no language. So we know what their words were based on what he did in terms of forming a dictionary. So I find that really interesting too. He did a lot with the gold rush too. The picture you see on the bottom there, when hides became really popular. Boots and leather and chaps and all those kind of things people would wear, and those were very popular. So men would kind of take the cow meat and do what they needed to do, and then carry it onto the board. So that's what you see men carrying like leather on their back and carrying it into the ship. Okay, now we're going to go into a little different area now. I'm going to talk a little bit about each town. So as you know, Cape Cod is a barrier island. So that's what they call it. A barrier island is one that kind of protects another area. So what do we protect? We protect Boston. So when you have big waves come in, to some degree, there's a little bit of a nuance there. So it depends where you were. Cape Cod Bay, which is on Easton, all the way from Sandwich to Easton, that's kind of there. That's where the packet boats would go out of. And then you have the Cape Cod Canal, that's where the boats go through, back and forth. Prior to that, you had to kind of go around. It was a much longer trip. It wasn't terribly long, but still longer. So the boats, it was a big advantage to have a canal. The Atlantic Ocean, there wasn't much happening. Like sailors would not go out of the Atlantic Ocean, like from Orleans all the way through to Provincetown. They would go on the bay side. So Wellfleet and Provincetown, there they had harbors, and they would take boats and go out from there. But very few docks or big shipping areas that lead directly to the ocean side. And then you have on the Route 28, I'd say there's probably 3 towns in particular that had a lot of ships going on. Chatham had a little bit, but we had a lot of shoals and dangerous, so it's kind of more dangerous here. They would have Falmouth would be a big area, Harwich would be another one. Those are probably the 2 biggest areas that boats would leave and come. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so now I'm going to talk town by town. When I talk about the town now, I'll tell you 1 or 2 things that have made a kind of maritime history, and I'll pick maybe 1 or 2 captains that kind of symbolize or personify what the town's all about. So in Bourne, you had a thing called the Aptuxet Trading Post. It was there in 1624, just right after the Pilgrims landed. And they traded them. The Pilgrims would trade with the indigenous people, pelts and goods and merchandise and all different things. There's a replica of it now. If you go to Bourne, you can go see. It's a very small version, but it's a nice little museum if you want to take it in. The other thing they have too is the Mass Maritime Academy, which is on the other side of the canal, but still part of Bourne. I was reading, if you want a good paying job, that's one of the best colleges to go to. I read that better than MIT, better than Harvard. They're saying if you can get your Mass Maritime license and become a certified merchant marine, you can make probably your first year, like last year I think $151,000 first job. So and goes up from there. So that's pretty good salary if you want that kind of a life. This guy's from Sandwich. We've got Peter Storms. I love that name. Isn't that a great sea captain name? Captain Storms. Just the vision alone is nice. Well, he was a captain with Simon Bolivar, which is another name you probably know. He was the George Washington of the South. So he liberated Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, all the different countries. His big skill was rum running and blockade. He knew how to run a blockade, knew how to avoid capture, how to run in and out of the harbor. So when Bolivar needed weapons or supplies or whatever he needed, this guy was readily available, could sneak him in somehow, knew what he was doing, and made a lot of money. I was reading, he went to a bank in Sandwich, and right before he retired, he wanted to put a deposit in. So he went to whoever the teller was at the time and said, here, please take this as a deposit. And the woman said, don't think we can take it. And why not? I said, well, the money you just gave me is probably 5 times more than the bank has total. But guess what? They took it. 2 days later, they knocked on the door. I said, we'll figure this out. Well, we'll find a way to take it. The other guy I want to talk to you about is Jonathan Bourne. He's also from Bourne. The town was named after him. He made a very good life by having invested in whaling. Back in those days, you could buy part of a whaling ship. You didn't have to own the whole thing. You could own 10%, 15%. You could buy like stocks and own part of it. He became a very, very wealthy man. What is notable about him, in 1860, when the Republican Party was being formed, and Lincoln was to be becoming president, they didn't want Lincoln. Many Republicans did not. They wanted William Seward. Remember Seward Folly? Remember that guy? They wanted him But he said, nah, that's not a good thing. I want Lincoln. And kept pushing and pushing. He had a lot of influence because Lincoln was, honestly, well, imagine our country today if there wasn't a Lincoln. What would have happened? What if, right? One of those what if questions. Brewster, my hometown, Brewster, he made a lot of famous quotes. One of his famous quotes is, the time, this is like in 1840, the time must come when this coast, meaning Brewster, all along the bay there, will be a place of resort for those New Englanders who really wish to see the seaside town of Captains. So he's kind of a prophetic man. Also, he also said that Brewster was the biggest sea captain town in he said the whole world, but I'm not sure that's true. I'm sure London and England has lots of areas too. But one of the reasons I wrote it, or I thought about this book primarily, is I wanted to say, is Brewster exclusively the sea captain town? What I found was every town has literally many, many captains. It really is hard for me to say one town is the definitive sea captain town. Yarmouth, they're all very similar in a way. The other guy from Brewster is Captain Isaac Clark. He was the first man to go to the northern Russian part, the White Sea. He crossed the Atlantic 13 times. There was a ship that he was commanding called the 10 Brothers, and there are a couple of people who I guess unsubstantiated, but they think that Brewster sea captains may have been slave traders. So that's another reason why I did some research to see if that's maybe it's true, maybe it's not, I don't know either way. But that ship, the 10 Brothers, that he died on board. And the reason that he went to a harbor where a lot of slave trading was being done, so that's true. And the ship to become fumigated with yellow disease, they call it tropical disease, malaria, which was a common thing among slave ships. So much so that when he came to Boston, not he, but the ship, he died. They buried him. Actually, they buried him in West Africa. And his wife wanted a cemetery plot for him in Brewster. So you could see his plot there, but there's no body in the crypt. So he's just the placket. But Boston Board of Health heard about this ship and said, we understand there's a lot of problems health-wise on this boat, so they didn't allow the boat to enter the harbor. They stopped it coming in. They examined it. In fact, they did a 2-year investigation, and they found no evidence at all of slave trading. They found corn products, they found different things back in the bed. Everything the captain said he did probably is substantiated about their research. So again, even though it was claiming there is circumstantial evidence, I would say he was. I wouldn't say he wasn't, but I certainly wouldn't say he was. I can't claim someone to be a slave trader if they're really not. But there is evidence, some people to the contrary. Chatham is another little town right here. We're in Chatham right now. Second oldest lighthouse in Cape Cod. Did you know that there are a lot of moon cusses here in Chatham? That's what we were famous for, this town. So people would love to see these ships getting wrecked, and storms would come up, and people would salvage and take the boats, and if they could kind of just claim it. Back in those days, you had to talk to your town official, theoretically, many people didn't, and maybe give a small amount of money back as a town profit, town entity. But people didn't even do that. So a lot of times there's 2 ways to be a moon cusser. In the dark of night, when ships couldn't see much, they loved that because then people just kind of crash on a rock or something nearby, and that could be their advantage. Sometimes they wave the lamp like pretending it was a lighthouse. Yeah, so they would just come in. People say, "Okay, it's time. This must be the way to go." But they fell for it. There's a place called Wicked Hill. Anyone know? I'm not sure if I found Wicked Hill, but they said there's a good congregation of moon cussers in Wicked Hill in Chatham. So. This guy's from Chatham too, Captain David Crowell. He was a big sponsor of the Gold Rush. He was smart. He opened up a great big general store type thing right in the Gold Rush territory, so people could buy supplies and food and bedding and things that they need. He was also in the Civil War. He had a boat called the Tuscarora, which was a northern ship. It was sword duty in the Civil War. And then when he came back, he became a school superintendent. And I'm a little jealous of this guy, because I had a wonderful career, great life, but I was only a superintendent, so I was there every day did. But this guy was a Civil War hero, a Gold Rush captain. He did so much more than. So I'm jealous of him. Dennis is kind of famous for a couple of things. Dennis, there are 2 places where they built a lot of ships in Dennis. You should go to a street called Corporation Beach. You know where Corporation Beach is? Yeah, right on the very end. They used to build boats down there. And the Shriffick Boatyard was right in the Seward Harbor. So those are 2 spots where they built boats. And they built some big boats. I would say they built probably 15 to 25 really big boats. So when you think of big boats, it's not just Boston or Salem, which did bigger boats than we did, more than we did. But we did our share. We did a good number of building our boats right here in Cape Cod. The picture you see on top there is a try, T-R-Y. It's not Cape Cod, by the way. That was a whale. But the reason I show you the picture, because I couldn't find a picture of a try. A try is where you process whale meat. So if you capture a whale, and you're going to bring it back to harbor, bring it somehow, you have to cut it up, you have to process it. Every single inch of the whale is used. You know, the oil, the everything, the bones, the brittle, the bris, everything. You know, the ambergris, which is the fecal area of a whale, that's used for medicine, believe it or not. Every single inch of the whale is used for something. And so a try would be where you bring the whale and they process it. They take a 10% cut and give you, everything. You sell the rest at that point in time. Captain Henry Hall from Dennis, as a young man, 15 years old, he fought in the Revolutionary War. His claim to fame was cranberries. He all of a sudden, he was experimenting. He had a pretty good sized farm in Dennis, and he put salt on one area, and he tried different things and different experiments, and sure enough, it grew bigger the next year, and then he tried putting more irrigation in different areas. That worked out pretty well too. So eventually, he grew a lot of cranberries. Not only did he grow them, but he showed people how to do it, and then he marketed it around the world. So cranberries went to Boston, cranberries went to New York, cranberries went to New Jersey. People began buying more and more cranberries. I happen to like a Cape Cod. That's one of my beverages. East Dam, too, is a very big place. Captain Hoppy Mayo, I'm not sure if you've heard that name, but he was an American in the Revolutionary War, was captured by the British, but then he escaped, managed to escape, and for a year and a half, he kept evading being captured. One of the kind of unusual things he did was he would take guided tours, and the British, I don't know if they just knew about it or just let him do it, but somehow he used to hide there for a week. See that house over there? He used to be there for 2 weeks. He would actually show people where he was hiding in various places while he was being searched by the British. So I would call it brave or stupid. I would call it stupid, but that's the way he did things. So there's a picture of Captain Penniman there. Captain Penniman was one of the biggest whalers on Cape Cod, anywhere in the world. He is well known, probably one of the wealthiest men too. They say he might be the third most wealthy man on Cape Cod, and maybe even in the country, possibly. But that whole area, as you know, Fort Hill is all, that's where he lives, on Fort Hill. On Saturday, in July and August, if you guys have a chance, go to the museum, the house right there, and give guided tours. And it's a nice tour to take. You learn about his wife, Bessie. She went on the boats with him quite a bit, too. Harwich is a nice little town. In the 1850 census, they say 71% of the males, you have to put that in the sense of what your job was, I'm a carpenter or whatever you are. So 71% of Harwich in 1850 was a mariner. So that's a pretty good number. There was a book, actually if you put in your browser, just put in any computer browser, log of Harwich vessels, just put that in, there's a book you can look at. There were 620 ships that came out of Harwich during that time period. That's a lot of ships. So there was obviously a lot of flow back and forth. The hand you see there is from a man named Jonathan Walker. He was an abolitionist. He was a sea captain. At one point he was near the Florida coast and was told that there were some slaves on an island off the coast of Florida. Can you please save them? So he took his boat, put them on board, began sailing away, and got captured. Because they had a thing called the Fugitive Slave Act. So it means it was illegal to take slaves on board. So he broke the law. Okay? He was captured and served a year and a half in jail. And as punishment, they didn't put him anymore. They kept him in jail a year and a half. That was it. They took his hand and took a branding iron, and they took a hot iron, and they put in his hand SS, slave saver. Well, I think he's the only known prisoner that I could find who was punished in that way. That's kind of a cruel, unusual punishment. I'm pretty sure that's not what the Constitution says we're supposed to do. Pretty sure. Mashpee is kind of a nice town. Mashpee, as you know, is where they put most of the indigenous people. So the indigenous people given some land, and they could live there. In the beginning, up until the Revolutionary War, I'd say about half the people that worked on whaling ships were indigenous people. And the way they came to be was they would let the indigenous parents, mom and dad, go shopping, get a blanket, buy food, buy whatever they needed, some kind of need, and say, well, okay, we'll write down how much you owe, and then at the end of a year or a certain time period, they say, you owe us X amount of dollars. And of course, they couldn't pay it back most of the time. So what they did was say, well, we'll make a deal. We won't collect right now, but we want your oldest son, who was 16 years old, to work on the whaling ship for 5 years. And that's how they probably took about almost like 1/3 of all the young indigenous people, all the males anyway. So that was the main crew, main people who did whaling. This guy, William Apius, he was an indigenous person himself, came to Mashpee, didn't live from Mashpee, but he did a lot to protect the people, so he was trying to help them. It was a high mortality rate. When these indigenous people worked on the whaling ships, I'd say about 1/3 of them never made it. I mean, they died on ship because they did the most dangerous jobs. They were the harpooners, the climbing of the sail, and reaching out the ocean and bringing the whale meat on board. So they had the most dangerous task of it all. Orleans. Let's talk about Orleans for a minute. You see the picture on the bottom? That's the old mill prison, and within there, during the Revolutionary War, there was a captain named Isaac Snow. He wasn't a captain. I take that back. He was a seaman, but not a captain. He was in prison there, but he managed to escape from that prison and went to France. And who did he meet in France? But he met two very famous people, Marquis de Lafayette and another dignitary, who gave him money for the American cause and said, we support you. At that time, the French were really big on independence. It's right before their revolution. So they said, let's have free countries everywhere, right? So they were kind of big on that. So he came back here, was a selectman in Orleans. At that time, East Ham was divided. Okay, East Ham was really big. It included Truro, Wellfleet, Orleans, included a couple towns. He said, let's separate Orleans from East Ham, and let's call it Orleans, because that was the town where the French dignitary lived. So as a way to pay back the French people. Provincetown is another place we talked about too. Provincetown, a couple of things. You see the Mayflower Compact was there. So in 1620, when the Pilgrims landed, they had to land somewhere. So they really, you know where they really wanted to go? They wanted to go up the Hudson River near the Albany area. That was their goal, but it didn't quite work out. The ships came on board and they got tussled and the ship began falling apart a little bit. So well, let's be safe. Let's just dock here in Provincetown. And while they were there, they realized saying, well, if we do settle here in this general area, we're going to need laws because there's no laws, there's no American laws that we can go by. So they came up with a series of kind of very generic laws called the Mayflower Compact, what people can do, what people can't do, and so on. It became big on whaling too eventually. I do another talk on whaling, by the way, which is kind of interesting. But the black people, the guy you see on the picture there, his name was Absalom Boston. Absalom was an interesting little guy. He was the first known black whale captain who had an all-black crew. So he was married to an indigenous woman. Back then, the indigenous, that was the only way they can get married. Most black slaves, even if they became free, and many did in New England, many slaves did become free, they couldn't marry white women. It was kind of against the law, and that's certainly not the protocol to marry a white woman. It would be looked down upon. So they married indigenous people. So it's kind of a mixture of bloods. So when you say black and indigenous, are kind of a conglomerate. Those two terms kind of go together when you think about that period of time. He was a big whaling captain in Provincetown, made a lot of money, became the head mason, which is an honor. Also, he wanted to put his kids in school in Nantucket, and he had a house in Nantucket. And they said, no, we don't let black kids go to school, public school, I'm sorry. He said, wait a minute, I give taxes, I run a big company, and so on and so forth. I have to let my kids go. He took it to the Massachusetts Supreme Court and won his case. So he's one of the first civil rights cases in America. He won his case. His uncle, who was also the last name of Boston, Prince Boston, he was on a whaling ship and working under the auspices of his owner. And the owner had a will that said, when I die, I'm going to give you your freedom. Well, unfortunately, 2 weeks before he was still at sea, the man died. So the will could not be executed as desired, right? He was still on the ship. So when he landed, they didn't give him any money, they didn't give him freedom, they didn't give him anything. So Prince Boston, this guy's uncle, went to court and he won his case. Because back then, whaling captains, black whaling captains, could not collect profit. You had to give the money to your owner. You couldn't keep any money. That's just the way it was. All right, Sandwich. Sandwich is famous for a couple of things. What some people don't realize, the Sandwich Glass Company is only a mere shell of what used to be. Sandwich Glass used to be about half the town. It was huge. You could see how big the glass factories used to be. They made more glass in Boston and in Sandwich than any other place in the world. They made lots of glass dishes, cranberry glass, and all kinds of ornate glasses. They would hire people from Europe, the English and the Irish particularly. The Irish were really good at hard labor, and the English were really good at the fine labor, the custom work. So a lot of those people worked for them. The boat you see up on top there is called the Acorn. Acorn's a ship, a little packet boat, that would run a daily run from Sandwich to Boston. And that's how glass got moved. Many people think that they had glass works in Sandwich because of sand, but the reality is the sand, there is sand there for sure, but it wasn't conducive for glass blowing. They actually poured in glass from the Great Lakes. That sand is a better quality glass, different quality to make glass properly. So it's kind of interesting when you see that. Oh, the reason I call it the Acorn, let me just tell you a quick story there too. The guy who Jimmy Jarvis is the owner of the Sandwich Glass Company. So he hated to spend a lot of extra money. So when trains came in around 1855 or 60 and that, he said, I'm not going to spend these outrageous, exorbitant rates for train travel. I'm still going to use my packet boat. And one of the town people said the Acorn, there was also a family name too. The Acorn is a crest, or a family crest. He said that acorn does not fall into the ground that can raise a tree big enough to support your boat. So it's one of the big long things. He said, oh yeah? What? So he did. He built a ship, the Acorn, and did that for many, many years, just to prove he was obstinate. Truro was big, as you probably know, life-saving stations along the way. That was a tough job. That was an actual job. People could become a life-saving agent, and they got paid minimal money. Some of the time they got paid, it could be $5 a week, could be $8 a week, depending on what town you're in and what your duty was. There were 2 shifts. They're both 12-hour shifts. Either you worked the morning or the night, and you worked all night long. You have to be up, you have to look around, you have to be attentive. If a ship sailed and got crushed or ruined or something, your duty was to rush out and to save those people. Also, the Nix's mates, that little black thing that you see, is kind of like a lighthouse type form of a lighthouse. That was kind of big, and that was formed. It was called back then. And I told you about Edwin Collins. That was a fellow who did the big shipping industry. He was from Truro. Wellfleet. In 1865, a lot of men, most of the men actually, worked as mariners, more than half actually, from Wellfleet. There was a fire in 1850. Wellfleet Harbor was much bigger than it is now, maybe twice as big. So you know where the library is and the restaurant, the bomb shelter, that place in there. There was a lot of that was destroyed by fire. It never grew. Many people thinking about making Truro like a maritime capital, but after the fire, it never happened. There was one man, Lorenzo Del Baker, who he was doing a lot of different kinds of things, but one day, he kind of as an experiment, he tried some tropical fruit, mangoes and different things, and then bought a couple bananas, and he brought some bananas back to Boston and to New York, and people said, this is pretty good, I like these bananas, this is a good thing. So what he did was they became very, very popular. He began the United Fruit Company. He began on the islands in Venezuela and off the coast of the Caribbean, a lot of plantations. So men would grow bananas and fruit during the day, and he would ship them back and forth. It was kind of his main thing. Eventually became Chiquita Banana. Eventually became a real big company. And that was the kind of boat. The boat you see on the picture there, a pinky boat. Pinky boat, this is what a packet boat could be. Some people call pinky boats and packet boats. But a packet boat doesn't have to be big, just to show you what the packet boat could look like. So George Baker was his relative, his uncle. He did a lot of packet boat shipping. He was a great fisherman. He was known to be one of the best fishermen in the country. Yarmouth. Yarmouth is famous for a couple of things. One of the things about Yarmouth, you see the Judah Baker windmill right there? The windmill has been moved 4 times. It's on you make the turn on 28 right by the Bass River Bridge. If you just go down about maybe a third of a mile, you'll see that you can go there now. But it was originally in different places. It was here, it was there, everywhere. But each time a sea captain bought it, moved it, saved it, moved it, saved it. Arthur Eldridge was kind of a big, big name. But you can see how they traveled. Back then, this was his card. So he'd give you a card. So, well, you want something shipped, you want cargo, you want this, maybe give you a card, and then you contact him to do that. Have you seen in downtown Yarmouth on 6A, the Captain's Mile? Many homes were sea captain's homes. You see like a little black square, It'll say Captain whatever, Captain Ellis, Captain so on. I'd say a good, maybe 1/3 or 1/2 of those homes have been owned by sea captains. That's one area. And then you go to 28 to the Best Riverside, equal number of sea captains live there too. So Yarmouth had quite a few sea captains. All right, last slide, and we'll take some Q&A. John Sears from Yarmouth. They call him Sleepy John Sears because he was a narcoleptic. He had the ability to close his eyes and fall asleep as he began talking to you. And people said, "You okay? Are you okay?" And he would just keep talking. Somehow he would fall asleep even while he was processing information and talking to you. But one of the things he did was salt production. We needed salt. Think about the Revolutionary War or that era. There was no refrigerators. They needed to keep meat and everything fresh. So with the old-fashioned way to make salt, they would take just the salt water, evaporate it, and use salt as kind of a criminal way. But he refined it and refined it. Eventually used windmills and kind of connected it as a power source and kind of keep the water flowing, kept it going, kept the sun and the radiation. So he got it down to pretty well of a science. So between 1810 to 1840, pretty much every town in Cape Cod had a salt mine. So if you look down these roads, you see Salt River Road, Salt River. Chances are pretty good. Down that road, there was a salt area. Pretty good chance, because it was a very popular thing to do. Okay, well, I'm going to quit right there, and I'll take any questions you have. But before I do that, let me just tell you, I do have a couple of books here, if you're interested. Oh, you want to mention that, John? Or you want me to, Bob? It's up to you. Some of you have bought it already, but it's $20. If you do, it's fine. I don't do this to make money, because I don't. I do it because I love it. I love history. I'm a reformed historian, I guess, right? More and more, the more I read, the more I'm interested, the more enthusiasm I generate. So I'm happy with that. So this museum, I give this museum a lot of credit. I mean, this was a magnificent tribute to American ingenuity. I mean, you think about all the radio waves and all the communication systems we're developing around the world. It's phenomenal that they have it here. So thank you for your attention. I didn't see anyone sleeping. Not yet, anyway. Thank you for coming very much.
Thank you. Okay. Just a reminder that asking questions are easy. Just click on the Q&A at the bottom of the screen and type your question, and we'll relay it to our speaker. Are there any in the audience?
Yeah, I have a question
Yes, sir.
about if you want to learn more about the captains with grandkids or whatever, where do you?
Two good libraries I do it. They're libraries.
Let me repeat the question for the
Oh, sure.
audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to learn more about sea captains, what's a good reference to go to?
Yeah, there are two places, I mean, there's a lot of places, but two that I've used a lot. Cape Cod Community College, in the bottom, has a Wilkins Library, historic library. And especially if you call her ahead of time, the librarian there, and say, I'm doing research on slavery, on
have
sea
the
captains, on commercial shipping, whatever. She'll do it for you, and she'll come with material. The other one is Sturgis Library. Sturgis Library, they have actual documents. I held in my hand more than once, like an 1820 shipping log. I'm saying, wow. But you have to wear white clothes, they have to watch you, and it makes sense. But it's really, and New Bedford too, New Bedford, they have a nice library on their bottom too. So there's a lot of places. It takes effort. You don't just walk in and you have to announce yourself in advance and make a reservation and so on. Good question. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm just curious, did they always keep a log of their, whatever they were doing or transporting or journey or whatever?
So the question is, did the captains keep a log of their activities?
And the answer is yes, they're required to. To become a captain, you had to pass a test, and one of the requirements is to remain captain. You had to keep a cargo log. So you have to put down what you're shipping, where you're going, what you're coming, because for toll purposes and tax purposes and so on, you need to keep track of everything. So yes, there's logs were required for everything. Of course, they fudged here and there. There were a few people who would bring in maybe a slave now and then or rum or something unusual, but for the most part, the records were fairly accurate.
But how did we come by way of these logs? Did they just bring them in?
Yeah, the companies themselves, they were kept on record. And many of them are on electronic devices now. I mean, there are a few real, actual logs that you would look at, but that's kind of the minority. There are very, very few of those, but they're available. Another one, the Mass Marine, where the JFK library is? That's another thing, the Archive Museum. They have a phenomenal archive section. They have a lot of stuff at sea captains there. Any other questions from here? Comments? Hope you learned something, a couple of things, I hope. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. So